All right, welcome everybody. This is the Kubernetes SIG architecture um, community meeting for February 27th, 2020. And please all abide by our code of conduct. And I hope everybody has a good meeting. So let's get started. Today we have just some project readouts. I don't think we had any action items last time. So Hippie Hacker, you want to take it away with conformance? We cannot hear you, or I cannot hear anybody. I haven't heard anybody yet speak.
Yeah, I can't hear anything.
You can't hear me, Jordan, or you can't hear Hippie?
I can't hear Hippie.
Okay.
The mute test.
Oh, I can hear you.
You can hear me now?
Yeah.
All right, let me remute and try sharing the screen again. So I'm going to click on.
It's just not sharing if you want to share. Go for
Thank
it.
you. Share, screen, share. Can you see my readout? Let me go ahead and pull this up into another view, web browser. Lots of stuff. So this is the focus of the update is on velocity. And our velocity has been pretty poor up to the first quarter or first half of last year. But we've had a lot of help through Aaron and other folks to just really simplify and clarify the workflow. And that's resulted in consistent velocity increases for a good long while, and I think it will increase. A key part of that is the triage process that we do during our meetings, creating mock test tickets, and those flowing into before we start doing test PRs and promotions. It's helped a lot. And if we go look at the data, we're soon going to replace the main API Snoop site with this data that comes from our buckets. I'll drop this link into our chat. It's just API Snoop HHII co-op. And this is approximately the last year. And if you go into these data points, they'll take you to the buckets related to that data. For 2019, we saw a velocity increase of 300% in the second half. Aaron helped to curate much of the culture and process that contributed to that, helping us get the needle moving because it was quite stuck. The reason those numbers come from the first half of the year, we got about 2% of an increase. In the second half of the year, we got around 7%. So this was the summary for last year. And I think that's positive. And I like those numbers. I'm learning a bit about objectives and key results. I know there are a few companies that use that and a few cultures, so I figured it might be easy just to say what our Q1 objectives were, at least in generally for the conformance subgroup. And I'd love to see, and I think I'm feeling pretty orange about it as of yesterday. So I'm not fully green, but that's okay. It's time to stretch. Can we get 100% increase over what we had in the second half of 2019, our overall? And the result to measure that, did we get there, is number one, did we get 27 new conformance stable endpoints? That's what I want to see. I think we all want to see. I think we'd also like to see a 6% overall coverage increase by the end of March. Here's the underlying stuff that's in the pipeline. These are the things we talk about on all of our conformance project meetings, is moving it up to the conformance test percentage points. So we are currently at around 2.2. And these are the 10 points that are in already either merged or are waiting for approval. There is more than one test as of right now, but this is the one test when I made the slides. We try to keep one or fewer things, just one per person inside this in progress area. We have a sorted backlog, and all of this backlog has been reviewed for the mock test that says, is this endpoint something we want to have in conformance? Is this the right documentation? Is this mock test that we've written exercise it correctly? So we're pre-validating all the work, and that workflow has led to a really good increase. The older way we did stuff is hard. And so we've got a few of those stragglers cleaning up, but I'm hoping that those PRs will either merge or we'll be finished with them soon. Also, as part of our Q1, we'd like to finish migrating all of API Snoop onto PROW and onto EKS as far as the different components that we use. Number one, result that everything we create with API Snoop is created by PROW. That way everybody can understand how we got here. I'd also like a key result of all of our GitHub workflow has been a little bit dicey. We tend to throw push to master and things, and so we want to move more towards the Git flow adopted by the Kubernetes community. And then finally, there's a few non-PROW pieces that I've been using our, II's Google project, and I send the bill, and we'd like to use the infrastructure provided by the CNCF members either, and we're doing a lot of that with PROW for Google, and there's also a few pieces of EKS that we'll be moving on to. That way I'm not sending, there's no other bills. Previously, we've used a Packet and GCP. And if we move, we'll still be using Packet for the dev boxes and things, but this work helps us for next quarter to be ready for CNCF case conformance and Kubernetes gating. Our last thing for Q1 is trying to mentor and teach some test writing workflow. And we'll be doing some of that at KubeCon EU. Pretty much we're going to take some of the flow we've been doing and do some mentoring there at KubeCon, and I've lined some of that up. It's becoming a lot more polished, starting from just having Docker and running a few commands to getting in cluster development that creates our mock tests and our workflows that result in what gets validated by the conformance meetings every other week. Any questions so far on Q1? I can move on to Q2. Some objectives for Q2 are a 50% increase in coverage based on what we did in Q1. So we had a really good 300 increase over the last year, for the last half of last year, and then we're going to still have velocity increase. It's going to be around 100% over what we did before, and I think we can still pull off a 50% increase in Q2, and it's going to look something like this: 40% or 40 new conformance stable endpoints, 9% coverage increase, and this should get us to a really visible 50% stable endpoints by July. I'm putting it as a stretch. I think we can get there still. This may change based on conversations we have in this meeting and the work that John and his team have got as far as the behaviors. But this is what we have, and so I'm moving toward those goalposts. Q2, we should also be gating KK PRs that touch APIs or tests. And how we measure that is we'll be commenting the actual list of increased or decreased endpoints. So anything that touches Swagger, I think we can do it for alpha, beta, and stable. So this is the PR that added these particular endpoints. These got removed from stable and moved over to beta, and we can do, that's just comments. Also, separately commenting with a list of increased and decreased conformance endpoints. So these are the new conformance endpoints. We'll also comment with endpoints if they disappear for some plumbing reason, and we'll block on those so we can't drop the list of endpoints. There was interest in Q4 and Q1, but the number drop was minimal, and we've caught all those manually. It's had less priority because I was focused on velocity. The team was focused on velocity. We'll also look at gating Kate's performance, or CNCF Kate's conformance PRs where people submit their conformance results. The gating there will be commenting with a list of unrun conformance tests. We've had some number mismatches where, depending on how they ran the test, they ran a different number of tests, possibly different tests, and we need to know that we know that they passed this precise list of tests in an automated form. And possibly, if there's interest in the workflow, like we go and we mentor in Amsterdam, maybe there'll be some folks interested in doing this beyond the II and conformance team. In summary, prior to Q3, I think I didn't quite finish the summary, but prior to Q3 2019, velocity wasn't great. Second half, it increased, and then Q1, we're doing a whole lot, and then it's going to get better. So in general, this is the roll-up and status for the conformance group sub-project, and I'll turn it back over to John.
Okay, awesome. Thank you very much. Happy, any questions? Dims, looks like you have a question.
Yeah, so at some point we talked about publishing a list of tests for that specific release, conformance tests, with the release artifacts. Have we done that yet?
I don't think that we have. That is part of a documentation PR that goes into CNCF conformance. There was some scripts that were being run, but I don't think it's been hooked into the release cycle yet.
Because since we don't have that, the people who are checking the, on the CNCF side, the certification, I don't know if they are actually verifying if all the tests that needed to be run was run.
Yep.
So can we somehow try to do this for 118?
Definitely. I'll put that in as a priority to make sure that list is updated and that we have at least a manual way to verify the list, that the results that somebody runs that we say is okay.
Right. Ideally, we should have it with the release artifacts, so we don't have to do this by hand for every release. But whatever we can get for 118, I'll be happy with it.
Awesome. I will prioritize that.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, great. Any other questions? Okay, then if you can stop displaying, I'll switch back to the agenda. Okay, excellent. Jordan, API review.
Yeah, wanted to call out a few categories of work that has been going on over the past couple weeks. The first category is issues that have come up that are under active discussion. So I linked out to sort of the relevant issues or PRs if you are interested, but these are bringing up edge cases in some of the documentation and approaches that we've had around evolving APIs. And so there's a lot of discussion in some of these.
Why are they all mine, Jordan?
The
First one, you had the same question.
The third one is an overall one. So these are the first couple are cases where we either added a new field and had sort of special fancy rules around defaulting and immutability, and there's a lot of questions about like what should happen in those cases. My goal is to, once we resolve these specific questions, to clarify like what our overall approach should be. Like how did we get into this situation for these, and what do we need to be clearer about or stricter about or do differently to avoid hitting this type of thing again. So if you're interested, the first one especially, it's a very, very, very long thread. We might break GitHub eventually on this one.
Won't be the first time.
I think the thing that these have in common is that they're not the common paths that are breaking. So it's the version skewed master that is difficult. It's just difficult to think about, right? The pluralization is not something that's really ever been done before. We agonized for what, 2 months over how to do pluralization, and it turns out we still got it wrong in the face of patch. So
what pluralization? Oh, sorry.
Pod IPs.
how to pluralize a field.
Yeah, I'm not sure we got it wrong. I think the thing we didn't consider was old clients only know about the old field, and so the old field should always, always, always trump. Like that. We've had other cases, I think service account and service account name are similar, where the old field always takes precedence, and new clients are expected to set both.
Yep, it's just one of those cases. Like, I mean, we did get it wrong because I quoted the doc that we negotiated at you, and the doc says anything else is a failure case. So we literally got the doc wrong even after 2 months of waffling. So I think what these things have in common is we're off into the long tail of bizarro corner cases, which is actually a good thing.
Imagine how wrong the document could have been if we'd waffled for 4 months.
Anyway, in addition to like guidelines, it would be helpful to have specific types of tests. Like what is a set of tests that would have revealed this issue? And can we describe how you should go about testing a change if you're making a tricky change like this?
Yeah, I've gotten, this has come to my attention a number of times recently, and I'm thinking about like maybe a gigantic flowchart would be useful. Like specifically, I've heard that our existing documentation is difficult to follow and or too nerdy, which
it's not targeted. Like you have to read through 20 pages to find the 2 pages that apply to your particular situation.
Yeah, so I was thinking about making a big flowchart, taking you through more directly to the relevant section.
Yeah,
that's a large project actually. So
it can be, but there are a few really particular types of changes that I think would be high value and relatively low effort. So we don't have to solve them all at once, but if we have a couple or 3 different flows that are the types of changes that people make the most, that would be a great starting place.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, we could start with limited ambition.
The third item I like to, this is a quick doc I wrote up. Immutability, we have immutable fields in several places in the API, and then there's a proposal to add them or add the capability for them to custom resources. And we don't have a very principled approach to how that should interact with declarative reconciliation tools. And so this is just exploring like some of the issues it causes and what we would expect reconcilers to do, and are we giving them the information they need to be able to understand when the thing they want to reconcile is trying to change something immutable, and how does that bubble up to the user? And anyway,
so I I think immutable, I think this is actually a good thing for us to talk about, maybe not in this meeting, but as a whole project right now, because the server-side apply code is going universal with this release, which means we can begin to put schema checking things. It's like a central choke point for this sort of thing. So this is now a great time for us to figure this out.
And to the point of immutability, I think maybe the rule is you can't add immutable fields the same way you can't add a required field, because to the old client issue, if an old client didn't know about an immutable field, it can't unset.
So let's pair that with, we need some sort of ratcheting concept so that we can tighten validation over time. Just because server-side apply pulls up cases where our validation hasn't been correct. Like you can have two environment variables in a pod with the same name, and that breaks everything. But
Does it break everything?
If you send a strategic merge patch removing one of them, it removes both.
Yeah, it breaks the server-side apply. It does not break our pod API.
No, pod doesn't care, but the last one wins. So it's not even a useful thing to do. So it breaks client-side apply as well as server-side.
There are ways that you can abuse that. Since one variable can reference another variable.
I've looked into that, and I've
sequence?
heard that it doesn't actually, you can't actually use this to do like weird computation.
Yeah, I also don't know that I feel sorry for those people when
I
we.
agree with you. I'm just saying that
Okay.
isn't necessarily safe.
Yeah, exactly. But anyway, if we're going to be more strict and more consistent about enforcing our schema, we need a way to bring existing non-conformant objects up to par without breaking people. So that's ratcheting. Immutability in particular is interesting and more complicated than one would expect at first, because as Stefan has pointed out in some of his proposals for CRDs, like there's separate concepts about like a field could be immutable, but what does it mean for a container to be immutable? Is it okay to have the keys mutable, but not the content, not the values? Like, could you add something to a container, but not be permitted to change anything that is,
What do you mean by container here?
like a list?
Okay.
Like a list or a map. Yeah.
Let's not use the word container.
Yeah, that's not a good word for that.
Okay. Yeah, fair point. Yeah, can you add to a list or a map while not being permitted to change the current contents? Yeah, so it's actually rather complicated, and I think, Jordan, where do you think people should talk about this if this is interesting? Do you think the Apply Working Group is a good place to talk about this, or should we set up some other just make space in SIG API machinery?
I mean, I think it's probably broader than just apply.
Yes. But yeah. Okay. Sure. So maybe we'll take it up in SIG API machinery.
Yeah. So I think, Tim, you made a comment in the in that linked doc that like sometimes immutability is what you want because it maps well to something that is represented by the some underlying resource, and so you actually can't change this thing, and so a delete and create a different one models reality pretty well. I think I agree in some cases, but we need to do a better job of surfacing like which fields are immutable, or that a particular change is being rejected because of immutability problems.
To go back to the patch problem though, like if you consider that an old client at any point can send an old resource, you can never add something that breaks that old client, right? That should be the gold standard. And I think is what we talk about, but not always what we achieve. Adding an immutable field violates that, just like adding a required field violates that. And I feel a lot of empathy here because there are times when the cost of implementing a logically immutable field as mutable is really steep, steeper than is worth paying. But from an API compatibility point of view, either we decide we're going to allow those sorts of breakages, or we say we're not, in which case immutable fields are not allowed when you add them, just like
or you have to mitigate it by in the handler preserving the existing value,
which turns every put into a patch.
But every put is a patch today. Like this is the classic REST. Nobody has ever implemented patch the explicit way because it doesn't actually provide any value for end users unless you're completely objective. That ship sailed a long time ago. Our
But I don't
puts.
think, I mean, I didn't find in our logic any place that actually tries to turn a put into a patch by masking. But we don't have micro API versions, so I can't tell whether you tried to unset a field or whether you just didn't know it.
Yeah, so there are implications for adding fields to existing types. If you're going to make them immutable, you basically have to preserve the existing values or you break old clients.
Yeah.
And then the
put it
thing I'm
like
maybe
100%
more
of
interested in is the implications for new types. Like what is our recommendation going forward? Should we really try not to add immutable fields if possible? Like I think immutable fields have been sort of an easy button because it lets you not worry about reconciliation and kind of skip a whole category of consistency issues. But we see problems with them in like stateful set volume claim templates. Like if we have the ability to request a volume be increased in size, but if you used a stateful set to drive it, you can't do that in the stateful set. We used to allow changing selectors on workload templates, and we defaulted those selectors to match the labels of the template. And so if someone put a version label in their pod labels, and that has been happily ticking along, updating, every time they update their workload, and then suddenly in 1.16, those are immutable in apps v1, and now they can't update their workload anymore.
Do we have any mechanism for moving from immutable to mutable? Like Clayton, I know we've been on a bunch of API reviews where we've told people, unless you know you need to update this field, just don't allow it.
Yeah, and like pod is a great example of that, where I'd say pod being immutable has helped us from a pragmatic perspective evolve pods over time. And if we had made everything mutable, we would have drowned in a sea of, oh, this is just another bug. So I don't think immutability on a new V1 type doesn't seem to be an issue. Immutability on a new beta type is probably better. Immutability in alpha, it probably doesn't matter. Maybe just the issue is we went immutable too late because things were in real use. And like, I think that's the thing, is like beta is GA. Like we can't, like we pretend that GA is GA, and every time we've done it, it's come with a cost to some user when we change things at GA, and it's not perfect. So,
And
just
so
trying
I
to
think
do that earlier.
I think we can say immutability is useful, but you can't add a field that is immutable to an existing API without adding a whole context around it. Like if you added a new optional struct and inside that struct was an immutable field, that might be okay.
So
Yeah.
I think immutability is one example of a like schema change for which we need a general mechanism of breaking the news gently to old clients.
Yes.
Right? Like solving it specifically for immutability, but not for other things that we might want to do to objects like key deduplication enforcement. I think that's too single purpose. And there are multiple issues open on some sort of validation ratcheting. It's really the same problem.
But it has to go in both directions. Like
Yes.
it's useful to be able to remove the immutability constraint.
Yes.
And it seems like it should be safe.
That's drastically easier.
That's way easier.
'Cause
Like
you only have
a
to
client observing an object at two different points in time, like the main reason we put immutable things in place is because the controller that's actuating that state, it's hard or difficult or impossible for it to make that change. And so relaxing immutability restrictions when it's accompanied by like making the controller responsible for that, be able to do that.
And arguably, many of the places where immutability has been added on new fields was just we couldn't come up with a reason to make it mutable, but maybe we weren't properly dealing with the, like when you're adding a new field, you should be able to articulate what can change and when it can change. Most of the arguments for immutability in older existing objects was us coming in after the fact and being like, we don't really know what we want to make mutable, so let's make nothing mutable. When you're adding a new field, asking someone to think through it and the API design of what it means to be mutable seems reasonable. And we have generally trended towards mutability rather than immutability. Like, I can't think of anything that we've really, once it's existed for a while, it tends to become mutable. Not 100%, but certainly most of the new fields and new areas, we've gone back and made things more mutable.
So what's the follow-up on this then? Like, right now we have at least 2 separate docs, both of which are fairly lengthy. One is API changes and one is API conventions. I know because I happened to look at them this week. They're both in the range of double-digit pages. Should we try to merge them? Do we come up with a new section? Like, Jordan, you've written a doc. Are you signing up to write a PhD thesis on API management, or are we just going to talk about it and we're not going to do anything?
I like that one. Yeah. Right.
That's worked for us so far.
That's what we've done so far. It hasn't really worked that well for us.
Yeah, I would argue that.
I would love to say more stuff on this, but we are pressed for time.
Well, in this meeting, we're actually okay because there's nothing else on the agenda.
No, sorry, I mean,
but we need probably a separate meeting.
Yeah.
For,
No,
I think at minimum we should have guidelines for what you should do, like what Tim was saying about if you're going to add a new field, if you make it immutable, these are the implications, and you basically have to put lots of special handling around it to make old clients whole. So, like, we need to explain that. And then when we should explain the implications for making a field immutable in a new type. I think that's the minimum.
We also need to explain basically our entire API targeted at CRD authors, because they're increasingly a larger proportion of the people who are actually making these APIs, and they have all the same problems that we have for built-in resources. So yeah.
Okay, so can I suggest that somebody take ownership of this, and then
I very much want to write this doc, but I know that the reality is in the next 3 weeks I'm not going to have time.
Yeah, I want to write this document also, and I likewise have.
It'd be so satisfying. Oh, getting this all written down once. Oh, it feels so good.
Yeah, I'm super busy right now.
For non-Googlers, we're in perf review cycle right now, so many of us are in a black hole of make work.
How about this? I can take an action item to at least talk about this at the next API machinery meeting and make us all feel guilty about it.
Okay. And how about taking action item to define the specific deliverables, even if you don't actually write those documents? Like you just said, there's one around TRD authors. There's other, like there's one around the implications of changing, like what or a sort of little plan as opposed to just actually doing the plan.
Yeah. Okay. Maybe we can come up with an outline or something.
Okay. Cool.
Maybe.
So surgically, Jordan, we're going to have to update the pluralization section of the API changes doc to cover the patch case, and the IP family. We're working through what the result there is going to be. I think that was a mistake that we can document better on a surgical point. You can add an AI for me for the IP family defaulting. I'll take the AI to go document what you come up with. I'm whoever's doing the typing. I think it's Jordan.
Okay.
But the IP family, that's still an alpha, right?
Yes, right. We can learn from this. And then the last AI on the immutability. I'm not gonna have time to do it in the next weeks. I really want to, but I think it's gonna need more.
Yeah. Is this urgent in the next couple of weeks? I don't know if it's urgent.
My fear is it just gets lost again.
Well, yeah, that's that's what keeps happening to this. It's just not as urgent as like other things. I think it's beginning to become more urgent as CRDs take broader uptake.
Yeah, actually, I think Daniel, you made a really great point. Like both of those docs should probably be completely overhauled to at least also talk about CRD-based terms, if not almost exclusively.
Yes.
It's a great point.
Yeah, it's a big job. Yeah, I mean, if you take a long view, assuming Kubernetes continues on its current trajectory, the currently existing APIs are a small percentage of the APIs that will exist in the future. So
yeah,
we can still help a lot of people do it right from the beginning if we have good
and
docs.
I remember doing a lightning talk a year and a half ago that said everything's going to be a CRD eventually. So.
Okay, wow. So do we capture all those? And then Jordan, you're still up here. You got some more on your agenda, it looks like.
Yeah, the the next section was specific reviews that are targeting 118. There are 2 APIs that are making progress in this release so that they will be, the plan is for them to be ready to promote to V1 in 119. So Ingress has a set of changes that are being added so that it is complete to promote to V1. Those are linked there. And then certificate signing requests are adding support for multiple signers. That PR is in review. Actually, the API PR is reviewed and it's pending review of the implementation. So those are the 2 APIs making progress towards GA that are being updated in 118. And then there's a set of design discussions around cron job and pod disruption budget APIs. There were some outstanding questions on those, and so those are links to the CAP updates, and that is the work for that would likely happen in 119. And the last item, I did a review of the cluster API v1 alpha 2 to v1 alpha 3 update, and so that is a set of conversions and defaulting and validation, and so I linked to the notes for that, and it was recorded, but I don't have the link for that. I'll try to get Andy to throw a link to the recording. But so that was a couple-hour review of a CRD-based multi-version API, and there were a fair number of things that came up during that. Some investigations they were going to go do around some edge cases, and then fold what they find back into the docs, so that this is clearer for the next group that is working in this space.
So sounds like a lot maybe learned there from for CRDs particularly.
Yeah, I mean, it was more like what happens when you stack a conversion and a defaulting and open API based validation and webhook validation. Like if you put all of those in at once, like what order does everything run in? And there were a couple of questions that I wasn't quite sure about, so they were going to investigate and update docs for that.
Great. Okay.
That is it.
Okay. Awesome. Thank you, everybody. Any other topics people want to bring up here since we're all gathered before we wrap it up? No. Nope. Okay. All right. Thank you, everybody, and we'll talk to you all in 2 weeks.